In 1971, a man signed a piece of paper on a Sunday afternoon, and nobody outside Washington really noticed.
He didn't declare war. He didn't raise taxes. He didn't cut a single government program.
He just quietly closed a door that used to let you trade dollars for gold. And with that one signature, the United States government did something so simple, so boring on paper, that most people still don't understand it happened. It found a way to pay off debt without actually paying it off.
This is the story of how governments do that. Not through some Wall Street conspiracy. Not through a smoky backroom.
Through a mechanism so ordinary you've felt its effects your entire life and never once been told its name. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll never look at a price tag the same way again. Here's why this matters right now, today, not in some abstract textbook sense. Governments around the world are sitting on debt loads that are, mathematically, almost impossible to pay back the normal way. The US federal debt just crossed $35 trillion.
Japan's debt is over 250% of its entire economy.
The UK, Italy, France all carrying debt piles that would take generations of surplus budgets to erase.
And yet, none of these governments are panicking. No emergency austerity.
No shutting down the lights. They just keep spending, keep borrowing, and keep functioning like nothing is wrong.
That should confuse you.
Because if you or I owed $35 trillion, we would not be calm. So either every major government on earth has found some secret escape hatch from the laws of debt, or they're paying it off in a way we don't usually think of as paying it off.
It's the second one.
Let's break down how debt actually works first, because the trick only makes sense once you see the base mechanism. When a government spends more than it collects in taxes, it borrows the difference.
It does this by selling bonds, basically IOUs.
Investors, banks, pension funds, even other countries buy these bonds, and in return, the government promises to pay them back later, with interest.
Simple enough.
This is exactly how you'd borrow money from a friend, except the friend gets a certificate and a little bit of profit for waiting. Now here's the part that stops feeling simple.
That IOU is written in a number.
Say, $100, to be paid back in 10 years. But nowhere on that IOU does it say what $100 will actually be able to buy in 10 years. And that gap between the number owed and the value of that number is where the entire trick lives. Let's slow down and follow the money, because this is the part most explainers rush past.
A government owes $100.
It has two honest ways to pay that back.
Raise taxes to collect more real money.
Or cut spending so it has surplus cash lying around.
Both options are brutal politically.
Voters hate tax hikes. Voters hate spending cuts even more, especially when those cuts touch pensions, healthcare, or defense. So there's a third option.
A quiet one. A government can influence how much money exists in the economy in the first place.
Central banks, the Federal Reserve in the US, the ECB in Europe, the Bank of Japan have the power to expand the money supply. They can buy government bonds themselves, using money they essentially create for the purpose.
This isn't printing physical cash in a basement. It's digital.
A number in a reserve account increases, and that new money enters the financial system.
More money in the system, chasing the same amount of goods and services, means each unit of that money is worth a little less. That's inflation. You already know the word. But here's what most people miss about it. Inflation isn't just rising prices. It's a hidden transfer of value.
When the value of money drops, the real burden of a fixed debt drops with it.
Picture it like this. You owe your friend $100. 10 years pass.
Prices have roughly doubled in that time because of inflation. Your income has also roughly doubled, because wages tend to follow prices eventually.
You still owe exactly $100. But now, that $100 is easier for you to earn. It's a smaller slice of your paycheck than it used to be. You paid off the same debt.
The number never changed.
The weight of the number did.
Now scale that up to a government owing $35 trillion, and you start to see the mechanism clearly. Inflate the currency slowly, over years and decades, and the debt doesn't need to be repaid in any painful, dramatic way. It just needs to shrink in real terms while nobody's watching too closely. Economists have a name for this. It's called financial repression, and in more extreme, deliberate forms, debasement. It sounds abstract until you put real numbers next to it. Between 2020 and 2023, the US government spent trillions of dollars in pandemic relief, largely financed through new debt and a rapidly expanding money supply. Inflation, which had been sitting around 2% for years, spiked past 9% by mid-2022. That sounds like a crisis. And for regular people, it felt like one, at the grocery store, at the gas pump, on rent. But for the government's existing debt, that inflation spike was quietly useful. Every dollar the US owed from before that spike became easier to repay, because the dollars used to repay it were worth less than the dollars originally borrowed. Nobody sent you a memo saying your savings just subsidized the national debt. But that's roughly what happened if you were holding cash or a low-interest savings account during that period. Here's the uncomfortable math, laid out plainly. If inflation runs at 7% a year, the real value of money is cut in half in about 10 years. Not because it was stolen in a single event, but because it eroded, week after week, in a way too gradual for most people to notice or get angry about. Governments understand this timeline very well. A tax hike creates headlines and protests within days. Inflation creates the same wealth transfer, over 10 years, with almost no protests at all, because no single moment feels like theft. This is the quiet part. Debt doesn't have to be repaid quickly if you're willing to let it be repaid slowly, invisibly, by everyone holding your currency. Now let's put hype next to reality, because there's a version of this story politicians love to tell, and a version the numbers actually support. The hype version says inflation is caused by supply chains, or corporate greed, or war, or unpredictable global shocks. All partially true, in specific moments. Supply chains genuinely did break in 2021. War genuinely did spike energy prices in 2022. But the reality version says something less comfortable. Structural, long-running inflation, the kind that persists for decades even after the shocks fade, tracks very closely with how much debt a government is carrying and how much new money is entering the system to service that debt. It's not that governments sit in a room and say, let's inflate our way out. It's rarer and more mundane than that. It's a slow institutional preference. Every time a hard choice comes up between painful austerity and quiet monetary expansion, the quiet option tends to win, because it doesn't cost anyone their job in the next election. Over enough decades, that preference adds up to trillions of dollars in real debt simply evaporating out of the value of everyone's paycheck. There's a dark irony sitting right in the middle of this. The people who benefit most from this mechanism are the ones with debt, real estate, hard assets, businesses, anything that isn't just sitting in cash. Their debts shrink in real terms, and their assets often rise in nominal price along with inflation. The people who suffer most are the ones who did everything right in the old sense. Saved diligently. Kept money in a bank account. Avoided debt. Their patience gets quietly taxed by a mechanism that doesn't show up on any tax form. It is, in a strange way, backwards. Caution gets punished. Leverage gets rewarded. And almost nobody explains the trade-off to you before you make your financial decisions. Now zoom out, because this isn't just an American story, and it isn't just a historical one. Argentina has run this cycle so many times it barely makes headlines internationally anymore. Turkey has used aggressive monetary expansion for years to manage debt, and its currency has lost more than 80% of its value against the dollar since 2018. Even historically disciplined economies like Japan have leaned on decades of near-zero interest rates and asset purchases to keep unsustainable debt loads from collapsing outright. This is not a fringe strategy. It is, in some form, the default strategy of almost every heavily indebted modern government. Which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question about the future. If this mechanism works quietly for decades, why would any government stop? There is no political reward for stopping. There is no dramatic villain to point to. The costs are diffuse, spread thin across billions of paychecks, savings accounts, and pension funds, small enough in any single month to go unnoticed, and large enough over a lifetime to fundamentally change how much your work is worth. So here's where this leaves you. Every dollar, euro, or rupee you hold today is quietly being used as part of someone else's debt strategy, whether you agreed to that or not. The question worth sitting with isn't whether this will keep happening. History suggests it will. The question is whether you're structuring your own money to survive it, or whether you're the one quietly paying, without ever being told the bill was in your name.